46 years after launch, a dying spacecraft whispered back from beyond the edge of our solar system. Not noise, not static, but something that made engineers stop breathing and ask a question no one at NASA wanted to ask out loud. What just spoke to us from the dark? I still remember the moment the alert came through. A quiet room at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. No alarms, no celebration, just a sudden stillness, like the building itself was listening. Voyager 2 had transmitted something unexpected. And when I say unexpected, I don't mean corrupted data or a routine glitch. I mean a signal that shouldn't have been possible at all. Voyager 2 was launched in 1977, before smartphones, before the internet, before anyone imagined humanity would ever touch the edge of interstellar space. It was never designed to last this long. I was taught that Voyager 2 was a time capsule with a heartbeat, a machine built to visit Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, then drift silently into eternity. No refueling, no repairs, no second chances. Yet here it was, more than 12 billion miles away, beyond the protective bubble of the sun, floating in a region where no human-made object had ever spoken before. Interstellar space. That's when the transmission arrived. At first, it looked wrong. The Deep Space Network picked it up as a distorted carrier wave, weak, barely above background radiation, so faint that Earth's rotation almost drowned it out. Some thought it was solar interference. Others blamed cosmic rays. That happens when you're listening across light years of chaos. But I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The signal had structure. Voyager 2 doesn't improvise. It speaks in patterns burned into its memory decades ago. Binary rhythms, predictable timing, clean telemetry. This wasn't clean. It arrived late. It arrived stretched. And parts of it didn't match any command sequence we had ever uploaded. We ran the checks again and again and again. The same result. Voyager 2 was responding to a command we never sent. That's when the room went silent. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand where Voyager 2 is. It crossed the heliopause in 2018, that invisible boundary where the sun's influence ends and the galaxy begins. Beyond it, there is no solar wind to protect electronics. No familiar magnetic field. Just raw interstellar plasma. A place where radiation eats circuits alive. Voyager 2's instruments were already failing. Its power supply, a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, was decaying year by year. Every what was precious. And yet, somehow, it had gathered enough power to transmit a complex, structured message. That alone was terrifying. We decoded the first layer. Telemetry, voltage readings, temperature data, magnetic field measurements. And that's when the second shock hit. The numbers didn't make sense. The magnetic field around Voyager 2 was fluctuating violently. Not gradually, not randomly. It was pulsing, as if something massive was interacting with interstellar space itself. Voyager's plasma instrument, one of the few still alive, reported pressure waves moving faster than expected. Not shock waves from a sun. Not cosmic background noise. Something else. I felt my hands shake as the data scrolled, because I realized something no one wanted to say. Voyager 2 wasn't just drifting anymore. It was inside something. The engineers tried to calm the room, reminding us that interstellar space is not empty. It's filled with charged particles, magnetic turbulence, and remnants of ancient supernovae. That explanation should have comforted me. It didn't, because buried inside the transmission was a timing anomaly, a delay that repeated at precise intervals. Voyager's clock isn't perfect. It drifts, and we compensate for that. But this delay was too consistent, almost like the signal was being interrupted, then released. Interrupted by what? We pushed deeper into the decode. Error correction codes, subcarrier modulation, ancient 1970s software doing its best to speak across the void. And then we saw it, a pattern repeating in the noise floor. Not language, not words, but a response. Voyager 2 had sent a handshake signal, a basic, "I'm here," ping used to establish contact with Earth. And something had distorted it, not randomly, selectively. I remember thinking something that chilled me to the core. Voyager 2 was never designed to talk to anything except Earth. So why did its signal look like it had been handled? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that tiny spacecraft, smaller than a car, alone in the dark between stars, still transmitting, still listening, still alive. And whatever Voyager 2 was passing through, it wasn't quiet. Not anymore. When Voyager 2 went silent, that was the moment fear stopped feeling theoretical and became physical. Because silence from a spacecraft this old is never just a technical issue, it is a final breath. And after the decoded transmission ended, we waited for the familiar weak carrier tone that had survived for decades, only to receive nothing but the soft cosmic hiss of interstellar space. A silence so complete it felt deliberate, and for several minutes no one spoke, because Voyager 2 was more than hardware to us. It was a survivor, launched in 1977 on a trajectory that took it past Jupiter's raging storms, Saturn's rings, Uranus's tilted axis, Neptune's frozen winds, and then beyond the heliopause in 2018 into a region where the sun's influence collapses and the galaxy begins, a place filled with charged plasma, unpredictable magnetic turbulence, and radiation strong enough to slowly kill even the best electronics. And yet this machine had endured, sending whispers back to Earth from more than 12 billion miles away. So when the signal vanished, the unspoken question filled the room. Had Voyager finally died? Or had something interfered? And then, 22 minutes later, the signal returned, a delay that instantly triggered alarms in our minds because Voyager does not pause and resume communication on its own. It transmits continuously unless something forces it to stop. And when we re-established lock using the Deep Space Network, those massive radio dishes rotating across Earth to follow a target smaller than a pixel, we noticed something deeply unsettling. Voyager's orientation had shifted. Its high-gain antenna was no longer perfectly aligned toward Earth, not by slow drift or gradual degradation, but by a measurable, abrupt change, as if something had nudged it in the emptiness between stars. And that should not have been possible, because out there are no planets, no dense debris fields, no solar pressure strong enough to push a spacecraft. Only thin plasma and magnetic fields stretching across light years. Yet the telemetry confirmed it again and again. Voyager 2 had rotated, weakening its signal just enough to notice. And as we compared decades of historical attitude data, every correction Voyager had ever made followed predictable patterns tied to onboard thruster firings or system safeties. But this change matched none of them, meaning Voyager had not decided to move, it had been moved. And as the data continued to arrive, another anomaly emerged. Its instruments were reporting fluctuations in interstellar plasma pressure that spiked and dipped in rhythmic cycles. Not chaotic like background noise, but structured, almost wave-like, as if Voyager was passing through a boundary or region of compression we had never observed before. And that realization carried a quiet terror, because Voyager 2 was humanity's first physical witness to this part of the galaxy, the first machine to directly sample true interstellar space. And now it was telling us that interstellar space was not the calm void we imagined, but a dynamic environment capable of exerting force, distorting signals, interrupting transmissions, and momentarily silencing a spacecraft built to speak. And as I stared at the returning signal, weaker but alive, I couldn't shake the image of Voyager 2 drifting through a vast, invisible structure. Something shaped not by planets or stars, but by galactic forces we barely understand. Something that didn't care about human timelines or expectations. Something that could bend radio waves, twist magnetic fields, and momentarily grab a machine we sent decades ago. And in that moment, I understood the true meaning of what Voyager was showing us. That space beyond our solar system is not empty, not passive, and not safe. And that whatever Voyager 2 had just encountered was still there, waiting, as it continued its lonely journey into the dark. As the data stream stabilized, the fear shifted into something more unsettling. A slow realization that Voyager 2 was no longer just sending measurements, but evidence of a boundary we never knew existed. because the plasma readings coming in were unlike anything recorded inside the heliosphere, showing abrupt increases in density followed by sharp drop-offs, as if Voyager were crossing invisible walls made of charged particles. And when we overlaid this with magnetic field data, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The magnetic lines around the spacecraft were folding, compressing, and then snapping back, not violently like a solar storm, but with a deliberate, wave-like rhythm that suggested Voyager was traveling through a region shaped by forces far larger than our solar system, forces tied to the motion of our entire galaxy as it drifts through interstellar space. And I remember thinking how cruelly ironic it was that the most important discovery Voyager 2 might ever make was happening at the exact moment it was closest to death, its power supply fading, its instruments shutting down one by one, like an elderly witness struggling to speak before the lights go out, because Voyager's radioisotope generator, fueled by decaying plutonium-238, now produces only a fraction of the energy it once did, forcing engineers to turn off heaters and instruments year after year. Yet despite that weakness, the spacecraft was detecting what appeared to be a pressure front, a region where interstellar plasma was piling up against the heliosphere's outer boundary, creating what some scientists began to quietly call a galactic tide, a place where the influence of distant stars, supernova remnants, and the Milky Way's magnetic field combined to shape the space between stars into something structured and alive. And as I watched the numbers scroll, it struck me that Voyager 2 was effectively blindfolded, equipped with technology from the 1970s, trying to describe an environment so alien that even our modern simulations struggle to predict it. And still, the message was clear. The interstellar medium was not a uniform ocean, but a shifting landscape, full of currents, waves, and pressure zones capable of bending radio signals and nudging a spacecraft off its path. And then came the most haunting detail of all. Buried deep in the noise was a repeated fluctuation at a fixed interval. Not a message, not a signal, but a resonance, as if Voyager's antenna and the surrounding plasma were briefly syncing, amplifying and dampening the signal in cycles, creating the illusion that the spacecraft was being listened to, even though rationally we knew this was physics, not intention. Yet the human mind is not built to separate fear from mystery so easily, especially when a mystery is 12 billion miles away and unreachable. And I imagine Voyager drifting through this invisible sea, its golden record still bolted to its side, carrying images of Earth, sounds of laughter, greetings in dozens of languages, a bottle thrown into a cosmic ocean, now passing through a region powerful enough to distort its voice. And I wondered if this was what the universe sounds like when it breathes, not silence, but pressure, motion, and energy on scales we can barely comprehend. And that thought made the transmission feel terrifying, not because it suggested something was watching us, but because it reminded us how small we are, how little control we truly have once our machines leave the comfort of the sun, and how Voyager 2, alone and aging, was teaching us a final lesson, that the space between stars is not empty darkness, but an active, dynamic frontier that can touch, twist, and momentarily silence even humanity's most enduring messenger. By the time we reached Chapter 4 of Decoding Voyager 2's transmission, it became impossible to ignore the patterns repeating across every instrument reading, because each anomaly, the pressure surges, the magnetic fluctuations, the subtle but precise reorientation of the spacecraft, was synchronized in ways that suggested something external, almost as if a hidden hand were shaping the environment around it. Yet nothing in known physics could produce such coordinated effects at that distance, over billions of miles in a near-perfect vacuum of interstellar space. And as we cross-referenced decades of spacecraft behavior, we realized that Voyager 2 had never experienced anything like this before, not during the flybys of Jupiter's turbulent storms, Saturn's rings slicing through space, Uranus's icy winds, or Neptune's violent magnetosphere, because those events were chaotic but predictable, whereas this pattern carried rhythm, repetition, and a subtle breathing signature in both plasma density and magnetic orientation. suggesting that whatever was out there was enormous, far beyond the scale of our solar system, yet invisible to every telescope we have. And I remember the chill that ran through the control room when a senior engineer muttered under her breath that this was like watching the ocean move a single grain of sand from across the world, because Voyager 2, tiny and powerless, was being nudged by something vast, ancient, and unseen. And as I traced the telemetry across weeks, the spacecraft's instruments reported a cascade of micro-events, subtle energetic bursts, brief plasma density spikes, and minute orientation shifts, each happening in sync, like a conductor tapping a baton over billions of miles. And I realized then that Voyager was our first real witness to forces in interstellar space that no human had ever directly observed. A dark ballet of galactic energy, magnetic fields, and plasma currents choreographed by nature on a scale both magnificent and terrifying. And the more we decoded, the more it became clear that Voyager's golden record, the carefully curated story of humanity, was not just floating through empty space, but being carried through a vast, living environment, one capable of interacting with it, nudging it, and shaping the very signals it sent back to us. A humbling reminder that our first messenger into the cosmos had encountered a universe far stranger, older, and more dynamic than any of us could have imagined. And that the spacecraft's final messages were not just data. They were a direct, living testimony to the silent power and mystery that surrounds our tiny, fragile planet. As we reach the final chapter of Decoding Voyager 2's transmission, the terrifying truth became impossible to ignore, because the signal, stretched and warped by interstellar forces, was telling us something that no simulation, no telescope, and no theory had prepared us for. Voyager was not merely drifting through empty space. It was moving through a vast, invisible structure, a labyrinth of magnetic currents and plasma waves so immense that it dwarfed our entire solar system. And the repeated rhythmic anomalies, the subtle orientation shifts, the synchronized spikes in pressure and magnetic flux, the cycles in the carrier wave, suggested that Voyager was not alone in its passage, that the environment itself was active, responsive, and unpredictable, like a sentient ocean of cosmic forces that could bend, distort, and redirect a spacecraft designed for linear motion. And as I stared at the decoded data, I realized that Voyager's golden record, our message to the universe, was now traveling through something alive in the sense that it could interact with the craft, shape the radio waves, and imprint upon the telemetry in ways that were almost intentional. And the thought made my chest tighten, because for decades we had imagined the vacuum of interstellar space as a silent void, a safe highway for probes and stars alike. But Voyager's transmission proved otherwise, revealing a dynamic, possibly hostile frontier, one that could absorb, reflect, or manipulate signals and energies across unimaginable distances. And the most chilling part was knowing that this isn't science fiction. Voyager 2 is still out there, 12 billion miles away, continuing its lonely journey into the dark, sending whispers through a medium we barely understand. And each faint ping is a reminder that the universe is vast, incomprehensible, and far more alive than we had dared to imagine. A terrifying revelation that humanity's first steps into interstellar space have already encountered forces that might not just observe us from the shadows, but interact with our creations in ways we cannot yet predict, leaving us to watch, wait, and decode the silent, haunting messages from spacecraft that has become our only witness to the invisible, uncharted heartbeat of the galaxy.